All right, so basically, as I started looking into some research around the Ark of the Covenant, some of the traditional biblical understandings of its usage and descriptions, I started to do research into various Renaissance age biblical artwork and finding actual physical Bibles that obtained that have imagery that we've been able to obtain that show either scenes of the Ark being used or referencing the Ark, or demonstrating the same type of power that is usually seen with the Ark. So what you'll see here is a collection of images that are most widely known in Renaissance artwork as biblical scenes, but you can kind of see a theme that's happening here, which is things are always taking place in the sky, that there's events and beings and sometimes the conveyance of craft with wings and such, where things are happening in the sky. And that there was actually beings, of course, that came down from the sky. And so a lot of these stories in their traditional sense are very interesting. I, being raised as a Christian, always thought, wow, this is kind of interesting that there's something beyond Earth, but not enough to very substantiate it. It was always kind of like heaven is just kind of up there. So where it kind of gets interesting is that you can see that there's this overall theme where not only are they seeing things in the sky in the conveyance of craft or actual human-like beings, but now they're being given knowledge from these beings. And scene after scene, this is being represented in many different cultures, biblical texts, as far as documenting the evidence for these interactions. So while a lot of this artwork might be symbolic in nature, and this artist, of course, she was very well known, there's a lot of symbology in a lot of this artwork, but I think it also speaks to a larger perspective. Now that we look into the past and try and make connections around the ancient astronaut theory, it's very clear that we can see representations of, again, a conveyance of flight, some knowledge that these people are actually either coming out of some type of a craft or have opened a doorway. But any of these large biblical figures are actually being surrounded with technology. So time after time, a lot of these things that we see have to do with their ability and how that medium exists that they communicated to the human beings. And so the human beings in their representation of the technology seem to be giving us hints of technology, meaning it's not magic. They were doing their best to represent what they saw, but our interpretation of it is not magic. It's technology. So again, a lot of these things, this is a famous scene of, Christ on the cross. This is actually, I believe, a fresco on a church wall in Yugoslavia. And it was painted, I believe, in the 16th century. The point of that is it's really, really high up on the ceiling and it's hard to see. And if you get up there on a ladder, you'll look on the corners here, on the left and right corners of the image, you see, again, a conveyance of a craft and a being actually piloting the craft. So over and over these scenes of the power of flight, throughout our history, I think is a question that speaks to where people of our type, human beings, flying around in the skies and earth in ancient times, possibly, but it appears that what we're seeing is an overriding pattern of them being able to replicate what they were seeing without maybe not even fully understanding the components of how it worked. So a lot of these conveyances of flight are enough of an impact to say, wow, it looks like, I guess, some kind of a craft. But they get very specific in nature. And so as we started to look into some of these more specific cultures, I was always very fascinated with the Sumerian culture, because all of the references in the Bible of Adam and Eve or the Garden of Eden, the idea that there were winged beings that they reference as angels, all of these references and many more are found in Sumerian epics that are at least 2,000 to 4,000 years earlier than the King James and the Old Testament Hebrew version. Probably the recorded original versions of some of these tales, like the Great Flood. So a lot of this information really started to resonate with me around their descriptions of these gods that came to visit the Sumerians, which they called the Anunnaki. Now, many of the artifacts that were pulled out of ancient Iraq, which was then called Sumer, Mesopotamia, Babylon, but specifically Sumer, they had a very ingenious system of conveying information. Not only did they have a written language called Sumerian cuneiform script, someone called a stylist would use like an oversized screwdriver and could turn it and twist it into wet clay and make a document, a text document, and then they'd fire that into a kiln, a stove, literally keying that phrase right in stone. But accompanying their text, they had what we see here is the imprint of a cylinder seal. So they would take, also in the same clay that they write in, these round precious stones and could leave a positive impression. Let me go back. I have a few more of these we'll see, but it's a very interesting way to disseminate knowledge. So they had these perfectly carved reverse images that they would press over the clay to leave a positive surface and disseminate the pictures and the text throughout the city, like an old school newspaper, but very efficient. And you can see that, again, this depiction of the winged disc really is kind of prevalent in all of their artwork, and a lot of their pressings, cylinder seals, wall reliefs. It's kind of an overriding theme. And as we kind of jump, and forgive me, as I said, I'm going to jump around a little bit, folks. Now, this specific section we're looking at, I'm just kind of showing many instances that throughout the past, all these conveyances of flight, they did a pretty accurate job based on the knowledge they had. Now, this artist did a very excellent job. Again, this is the Madonna. I believe the artist is Saint Giovanni. And you can see that here, when we look at the picture, it's actually a cut-off version, but she's holding the baby Jesus down here. But as we zoom in, you can see that there's a gentleman over to the, let's see, maybe right side of your screen, is a gentleman holding his hands up, shielding his eyes, and there's a dog actually there as well. And they're both looking up at an object that appears to be emanating rays of energy of some kind. And this is very typical with all of the ufology sightings that we have today, is even with a camcorder, when we record it, it's basically just a ball of light, no matter how close we can zoom in.